Can you hear me, Benedict?
I can hear you now. I couldn't hear you for those last few moments,
Yeah.
but
Some audio issues there, and we apologize to our viewers. But just can you bring us up to speed with what's happening after today's dramatic developments, a crackdown on press freedom in Hong Kong?
absolutely. Today is one of the darkest days for Hong Kong after a year of many dark days. And what's happened today is that we've seen some of the most high-profile activists, Jimmy Lai, the proprietor of the Apple Daily, basically the only Chinese-language mass circulation pro-democracy newspaper, and Agnes Chow, one of the leaders of the Umbrella Movement, who's continued to be a very prominent activist, both arrested under the national security law. Both of them have been arrested in the past under other laws. But what's significant about this is that this very draconian national security law that was introduced on the 1st of July is now being used against them. And potentially the charges they face could carry up to life imprisonment.
Would you say that this was coming, this was inevitable in the lead up to what's happened today?
I think it was very likely, although I don't think anyone necessarily expected it to happen today. And we didn't also expect the Apple Daily newsroom, Jimmy Lai's newspaper, to be raided by 200 police officers. And so this is an assault not just on pro-democracy activists, but on press freedom. And I think a number of commentators have already said it marks the death knell for press freedom in Hong Kong.
And as you pointed out, what we also just hearing was that Agnes Chow has also been arrested. You mentioned that and taken, I think, to a police station, if what I see the pictures are coming in from Hong Kong are correct.
That's my understanding as well, that she's been arrested, taken to a police station. And that raises the question, who will be next? We've seen this round of arrests today. But if people like Jimmy Lai and Agnes Chow are being arrested, then it's only a matter of time before other key prominent activists could well be targeted. And then, of course, there's the question of those who are less high profile and who therefore will be at even greater risk because the world doesn't necessarily know of them.
Well, the allegations against the Apple owner and, of course, the businessman there, Jimmy Lai, are collusion with a foreign power, one of the allegations?
That's my understanding. That's one of the charges. And that of course, is one of the categories of crime under this very draconian new national security law that was imposed by Beijing on Hong Kong. And in terms of what his actual crime is under this term, all he has done is what any free person would do, which is to talk to foreign politicians. Well, I say any free person, not any free person gets to talk to the Vice President or the Secretary of State of the United States, but he's done that. He's talked to international media very regularly. And what's significant, I think, is that all of those activities he did before this security law came into place. I don't know specifically whether there's particular activities that he's engaged with since July the 1st, but if it is the case that they're targeting him because of his past activities, then that's very alarming because this law is not supposed to be applied retrospectively.
And we've also spoken in the past to Nathan Law. You've been with him a lot after he left Hong Kong a short while ago. Tell us what the British government has been doing in the meanwhile and in the run-up. What do you expect from them after today's developments?
Well, the British government has certainly taken some very welcome steps, initially making a very generous announcement as soon as the national security law was imposed on Hong Kong at the beginning of July, of offering a pathway to British citizenship for British national overseas passport holders who are Hong Kongers, up to about 3 million of them potentially, who have this special British national overseas status. And then subsequently, the British government suspended the extradition agreement with Hong Kong, which is a response in particular to the extraterritorial clause in the security law that applies that law to anyone, anywhere in the world. And so Britain, along with other countries, has rightly suspended its extradition law. But there is much more Britain can and should do. And I think the next step now is for Britain to use the Magnitsky sanctions legislation that it now has in place to sanction Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam, other officials in the Hong Kong government and police, and in the Chinese Communist Party regime. The United States has already started to do that, and what I think is needed now is for Britain and other like-minded countries around the world to coordinate an effort to put maximum pressure through sanctions.
Well, you're also part of IPAC, the Interparliamentary Action Coalition, which is working with like-minded countries. Now, you were talking about sanctions. China has imposed counter-sanctions even on the co-chair of IPAC, right, the US Senator?
That's right. I mean, I think the sanctions by the United States and hopefully if others follow would be significant because Hong Kong government officials and Chinese government officials do travel and they do have assets overseas. I don't think any of the United States senators, at least I'm not aware that any of them have assets in China. So in a sense, China's response is a symbolic act, but I don't think it really is very meaningful. And I'm sure that none of the people who have been sanctioned will be at all frightened or I think it will cause them to redouble their efforts.
So the reverse question is, you don't think Magnitsky-type sanctions are symbolic? They actually would have an effect?
I think they would have some effect. I mean, I don't want to exaggerate their effect, but I certainly think they would have some effect because I think officials in both the Hong Kong and Chinese regimes, do not want to be hit in their pockets, and if they have assets overseas, if they, as a result of sanctions, can no longer travel to certain countries, that will make life difficult for them and particularly for their families. And you may then start to see other people in the regime in China and in the Hong Kong government start to question the path that Xi Jinping and Carrie Lam have taken taken in recent years. So I think the significance of Magnitsky sanctions is that it will cause some pressure on individuals. And the particular importance of them is that they're not sanctions against the people or the country of China. They are targeted at individuals responsible for human rights violations, breaches of international law. And I think that's really important.
So you're expecting a kind of a ripple effect, but in terms of how China went through pushing through the law, the national security law, and what's started to happen soon after that, and then again today, you think that China thinks, it's brazen enough to continue down this path and nothing really seems to be changing its behavior?
Certainly China, the Chinese regime has been very brazen so far, and I think that's largely because up until recently, up until this year, it was allowed to get away with ever increasing serious human rights violations, and much of the world kowtowed to them and stayed silent, at least in public. I think now we are seeing an awakening around the world, but that needs to be translated into really concrete, coordinated action. If China continues to get the impression that all we'll do is make statements and not actually follow up with action, then it's going to continue not only with the intensification of repression in Hong Kong and in mainland China, but I think Taiwan will increasingly be in its sights, and then eventually our own freedoms further down the line. So it's really important that we meet this repression with concrete action and not just rhetoric.
What would that concrete action be that would change behavior or impose costs on Beijing?
Well, so part of it would be the Magnitsky sanctions that we've just been speaking about. I think it should also involve allies and democratic countries around the world, not just in the Western world, but countries like India, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, democracies in Asia, coming together to coordinate a response, to coordinate the defense of freedom and democracy, because I think this ultimately is not just a battle for Hong Kong's freedoms, it's turning into a battle for freedom itself. So a coordinated response that could include a rethinking of our economic relationship with, again, not the people of China, but with key sectors that the Chinese Communist Party has economic interests in. And so that means diversifying our supply chains, reducing our strategic dependency on China, and trying to ensure that when we do business with China, we do business as far as possible with businesses that are private and that are not in the hands of this regime. And the more we can do that, the more that will put pressure on the regime.
You spoke about Taiwan. It's interesting that top US health official has met the president and other officials in Taiwan, even as the crackdown on Hong Kong began, or at least intensified with the high-profile arrests there. That's the first high-profile visit and trip of a US official since 1979. Is that going towards what you're saying, a coordinated effort, or is America fighting a lone battle here?
No, I think it's a very welcome step, and I myself have written a number of articles arguing that we should strengthen our relationship with Taiwan. I haven't gone as far as yet as advocating full diplomatic recognition of Taiwan, but I do think that we should be strengthening our relationship with them. I mean, Taiwan is one of Asia's most vibrant, most successful democracies. It's also one of the places in the world that has most successfully countered the COVID-19 virus, and very generously helped others around the world, in total contrast to the behavior of the regime in Beijing. So I think it's in all our interests to do everything possible, perhaps stopping short of full recognition. The only reason I say that is that full recognition at this stage may be a provocation too far, but we should do everything we can up to that in terms of welcoming Taiwanese leaders in the capitals of democratic nations around the world, and having our government ministers visit Taiwan as we would any friend and ally.
Well, there are lots of calls. There have been, in fact, calls in India as well to up relations with Taiwan. We have a top diplomat who has been sent there. Some analysts even calling for the foreign minister of Taiwan to be invited. Now, when you talk about like-minded countries working coordinatedly against what China's behavior is, and you mentioned India earlier, India is not part of IPAC as yet, but what would you like to see India doing? Because one small signal that came out from the Indian diplomatic establishment was in the Human Rights Council, where the ambassador there did bring up the issues in Hong Kong, unlike what India had done in the past, but not to such a strong level. What would you like, say, countries like India to do?
Well, I very much welcome that, and I hope India will do more of that kind of thing, because I think the more that countries that are democracies can speak with one voice in fora like the United Nations, the better. And the more this is not seen as simply caught up with the US-China trade war or some kind of Western versus China tension, the better. So India's voice at the UN, I think, of course, in light of the tensions and the conflict on our own borders, I think India has every reason to be standing up to China. That might include greater support for example, Tibet and the Dalai Lama. You've already mentioned Taiwan, Hong Kong, and all these issues. I think
Uyghurs and Xinjiang as well.
Exactly, very much so.
There is a whole list, and there was a lot of confusion of the people who have already been arrested or are wanted in Hong Kong. And there seemed to be some confusion early on in the day when it seemed like even your name was on that list.
Yes, no, that was the list of not those arrested, but those sanctioned by China,
Yeah.
and it was. It turned out there was a tweet from a very respected journalist who thought he'd heard my name mentioned at the uh, Chinese Foreign Ministry's press conference announcing their sanctions. I think it turned out that it was actually Kenneth Roth, the executive director of Human Rights Watch, and apparently in Chinese, my name and his name are easily confused. So. But I mean, if Britain imposes the same kind of sanctions that we're talking about, which I hope they will, then it's entirely possible that some kind of retaliatory action against British people may take place, and I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't be bothered if I do end up on such a list further down the line. But it was a mistake today. As far as I know, I'm not on that list yet.
Were there some moves to try and sanction British police officers in Hong Kong as well? Is that correct?
That's correct. There are two initiatives beginning to be underway. One is the proposal that some form of sanction and against the assets of British expatriate police officers who are serving in command positions in the Hong Kong police force and who are therefore responsible for some very serious human rights violations over the course of this last year, and are complicit with the imposition of or the implementation of this draconian security law. But there's a particular new initiative announced today by a colleague of mine who happens to be a fellow of Hong Kong Watch, Luke de Pulford, together with Nathan Law and a coalition of others, to seek a private prosecution of those British expatriate police officers in the UK. And the legal advice is that is an option, and they're pursuing it, and I fully support that initiative, and I hope that it's successful, because ultimately impunity should not be allowed to continue. Justice must be pursued through whatever means legally that are possible.
Benedict Rogers from London, appreciate your time again, and thank you so much for bringing us up to speed of what's happening in Hong Kong. I suspect we'll be talking to you a lot more often.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're watching StratNews Global, and do follow us on our social media handles for all the latest. You can also log on to our website, stratnewsglobal.com, to get the latest news and analysis. You're watching StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh P.